So every year we choosing some interesting topic. Last year we are choosing some future technology to introduce to our audience, like DNA testing, the ray tracing technology, the automobile electronics, the video conference. Today, we choosing maker as the theme. We are maker, we are engineer, we are maker. We design, we build, we create as our daily job. We are human beings, we are maker. To build something is kind of embedded into our DNA. We build things for fulfill our needs, or sometimes we build things just for fun. People build toys, people build rockets, people build companies. To talking about this topic, I'm so glad that we can have our first speaker, Dale Doherty, can be our first speaker. He is the former CEO, the founder, and the current executive chairman of Maker Media. If you don't know Maker Media, you may know the Maker Faire, and this is the company, this is the guy founded Maker Faire 11 years ago. And if you see how they grow the Maker Faire to today, this is the map of Maker Faire all over the world. And last year, they make an amazing record in Shenzhen. In 2 days, they bring in 190,000 people, to the Maker Faire. So, without further ado, let's welcome Dale Doherty to go on stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? Good. How many of you have been to Maker Faire? Good. Well, we got some people in there that need to think about it. This May, 20 to 22nd of May, in San Mateo, you can go to a Maker Faire. But if you happen to be in other cities during the summer or the spring, you can find them there. I kind of want to talk a little bit about I think what drives the maker movement and the reason things like Maker Faire have become popular. I started Make Magazine in 2005, and we're about to publish our 50th edition or 50th issue. And I had no idea if this would be interesting or even popular. But in some ways, I was referring back to older magazines like Popular Science and Popular Mechanics, which once were read by young people to kind of figure out how the world worked, how things were made. And I really thought that was something that had gone missing a bit in our culture. And I wanted to bring it back, sort of a DIY sense of technology. These are things that you can do, things that you enjoy doing. And that was the idea here. So, I think the making is simply starting with some idea that's in your head and beginning to work it out and bring it out of your head and instantiate it, make it real through some kind of process, using tools, materials. Artists use paint and draw. Engineers and others have other tools, woodworkers. But to some degree, it is our own process, and it's really satisfying to take something that you weren't sure about and to begin acting on it and doing something with it. And I think it's something that all of us do, not just a few of us, not just something we do at work, but something we can do really in our backyard, our basement, our garage, or in our community. I believe that every child is a maker. When we're born, if you watch kids, they like to do things. Unfortunately, as they go through school, we almost take away the tools and we take away the context and the encouragement to just play and enjoy making. But you are makers, each of you. And as adults, sometimes we let that childish side of us go. and we only do the things that we get paid to do. But I want to tell you, there's a lot of people out there that still make things, even though they have no particular need to make them. It's not necessary that they do it, but it's an expression of who they are. And they enjoy using all kinds of things. And I think the incredible thing about the maker movement is that it can connect so many different forms of making and so many different interests that people have. So, part of what I wanted to do with Maker Faire was bring people together and just introduce them to the practices of making again, and to allow them to meet other people who made things in their community on really in an ordinary way. And I think in doing this, we begin to see these qualities of making, and while we might focus on things like hands-on, but there's something going on in our minds. And that's why I say earlier, it starts with sort of this creative, open mindset of thinking about what's possible to do. And it's playful. Like, this is someone made a spirograph, with a scooter. And a young girl who came to Maker Faire in Pittsburgh with a costume on, which I love. And, but it's that basic sense that making is engaging, and it engages other people. Making is playful. A lot of these images I'll be showing you are from Maker Fairs, mostly in New York last year, but other places as well. And we see people coming to Maker Faire having made something of their own. This young girl brought, I don't know what it is, to be honest, but it kind of looks futuristic. It looks like something from a movie or a science fiction movie. But she had dry ice in the back of her backpack, so she had smoke trailing out afterwards. And I just love that it was something that she wanted to do and wanted to share with other people. It's experimental in the way that science is, but in general, it's encouraging people to try things. Just to read about something doesn't mean you know it until you do it. It's expressive. This is one of my favorite ones. A young boy from Santiago, Chile, went into a makerspace there and said, "I want to build a dinosaur." And everybody said, "Well, what do you mean?" Well, I end up, thinking about it, and he ended up building a costume, really a puppet that he crawled inside of, and he walks around talking to people and engaging people. Making can be silly. Is this a robot? Yes, in one way it is a robot. It looks like a robot. It's playing music out speakers and will go up and dance with a kid who could go home and say, "I danced with a robot today." It is hands-on, and these are, when you go across a Maker Faire, you see lots of people touching things and engaging things. And that's something they don't get to do in school very much, if at all. And I think the Maker movement is trying to change that, to even bring it into the homes and introduce young people to something that maybe some of you had when you were young and helped you understand how to do things, but has gone missing today. It's experiential. Making is not so much, especially in a school sense, it's more about an experience that you have than it is about content that someone's trying to pass to you. It's interactive. This is a 19-foot tall giraffe called Russell that's been at almost all the Maker Fairs. And, I think a lot of the reasons that makers make things and bring them to Maker Faire is because they interact with other people. It's like a game, but you make something and you share it and people are happy. And it makes you happy. It doesn't have to be a business. It doesn't have to be a transaction. Sometimes just seeing a smile on someone's face is enough. It's reflective. I mean, Google sent us, not Google glasses, but science glasses. And, it's kind of fun to see the kids wearing them. But we look at what's going on, and I think we think about it, and we wonder, what is it and how can I do that? It's joyful. It's inspirational. This was last year, we had a fashion show, and it was really like hacking a fashion show. These women were disabled, and they're wearing 3D printed prosthetics. Not just for functional reasons, but for aesthetic reasons. They make them feel good and look good, and they're happy. And it was a very moving thing to see that. And Lisa Marie Wiley is a veteran in Afghanistan who lost her leg and in a battle, and she came back and was frustrated that she couldn't find a prosthetic that fit her. She's actually an extremely fierce and determined person, but she's very petite, and the prosthetics were awkward for her. So using a 3D printer, she was able to design one for herself. She wanted the prosthetic to be invisible. She didn't want people talking to her for 5 minutes every time she met someone about her artificial leg. It's innovative. This is a 3D printed robot called InMove that a Frenchman, Gaël Langevin, who's a sculptor and designer, created it and made it an open source project. And it was something he did on the side. He made all the parts, put up the designs for it, put up the process for it, and people began replicating. I see these at maker fairs around the world that all built it. But it was also interesting that a group called RoboHand developed a prosthetic hand, but it was based on the designs that Gaël had developed. Making is highly collaborative, and I think that's partially driven by the notion of the internet, but it's also driven by a lot of the growth in making occurs in maker spaces. It occurs in places where people get together and share what they do, and they work together. Instead of working alone, you're working with a group of people. And I think one of the things I really like is almost this intergenerational ability to share what you know and talk about what you do to other people. Making can be daring. We play with fire. We do things that perhaps are a little bit too edgy for school, but they certainly get your attention, and kids are fascinated. Another thing that doesn't always work well in school is it being messy. Teachers sometimes don't like that, but kids do, and it engages you to have your hands in a bucket of mud or dirt. It's social, and I think one of the amazing things about the way maker movement is sharing occurs even in families and in communities. What I love to see in school is when kids get to make something and bring it home and share with their parents and take it out into the world. And making also, I think today we're beginning to recognize it as a bundle of talents, really. And that this young boy, I see him at Maker Faire, and he's about 7 years old, and he calls himself the Little Code Ninja, and he teaches young kids to code. And he's, just a wonderful, talented, smart kid who wants to work with other people and create things for them. So my goal in Maker Faire, as I realized as we started doing it, really is to help people see themselves as makers and producers, not just as consumers. We have a consumer society that we live in. We can buy lots of things. But how can we move people to being creators, to producers and makers? We're bringing back the idea of learn by doing. It's not new. A lot of this isn't new, but it has been out of the mainstream of education. It's been really out of the mainstream of a lot of forms of learning. But it's very satisfying and rewarding to do things. And, I'll sometimes get asked, like, well, what do they learn by making? Well, the learning is embedded in making. You learn about circuits, you learn about fabrication, you learn about a process by doing something. And then I think one of the reasons it's popular today is because we get something back from doing it. Think about it. If you're in school and you take a test and they send that test somewhere else to be graded, and 3 months later your school gets a grade, you don't really get any feedback. But when you make something and you connect a circuit together, when you make something that's interactive or fun, right away it makes you happy to kind of see that you've created something. And then as you get feedback from other people, it gets even better. I think the other thing, this is from Maker Faire Tokyo, but we see ourselves and our culture in the things we make. They're expressive, and they say something about who we are. And I would have to say that's, in talking to a group of engineers, I think who traditionally are great problem solvers. There's something else going on in making that isn't just solving problems. There's something creative behind it, and I think it appeals to the current generation who see themselves as creative and want to kind of exercise their creative abilities and apply them in ways, whether that's music or art or making. It makes us happy to do these things. And I think out of this hands-on activity, this sort of learning to do things, we begin to develop a mindset that has many of the attributes that I just talked about: joyful, playful, creative, experimental, expressive. And that's how we begin to look at the world, as something where we can apply our own skills and abilities to do things that are important, and that we can change the world in small ways or perhaps even large ways. Making is like a practice. It's something that is not just an activity you do once and you're done. It's not just make one thing. It's really like playing music or doing anything. You get better by doing it repeatedly, by having different challenges and different opportunities to make. And I think one of the challenges we have in school is often we can't give enough time for someone to get good at something. We're trying to introduce it in such small doses that it's inconsequential. This fellow John Bruner talked about education, particularly how do we learn best, or in what context? And he said, particularly middle school and high school students, learn best when there's a deep immersion in a consequential activity. So it means they get to dive into something. And I would say immersion is play. You're doing something and you're not terribly conscious of how much time has gone by or what you're doing. But it matters to you, whether it's just that sense of reward that I talked about, or it matters because you have a sense of developing your own capabilities. Marshall McLuhan said, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. Well, the maker movement is growing partially because we have new tools like 3D fabrication or cheap electronics, and to some degree the availability of components like sensors. We can do things and build things that maybe 10 years ago you would need to be in industry to do that. And we're seeing whether it's kind of reinventing things that were costly and proprietary, and taking them down, sometimes 10 times in price, to people having their ideas and then realizing that there are tools, both hardware and software, that allow them to develop that idea. When before they might have said, no, I can't do that. Or I can't do that unless I'm in a laboratory or a factory or in a university. But I believe that this sense of making, a sense of participation, changes us. We become a different person. We become engaged. We become confident and creative and able to do things. And that gives us a certain power to change the world around us. Again, whether it's an artistic expression, whether it's problem solving, or other things. So if you haven't been to Maker Faire, and obviously some of you haven't, I'm going to show you a short video here. I believe this is last year in the Bay Area. And, I'll say the Bay Area is our largest one. We've done it 10 years. This May will be our 11th year doing it. It's overwhelming. It's really big. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of people there. But it's fun, and it's amazing. And you see stuff you'll never see in other places. Making is so basic and fundamental to who we are that all of us are makers. It's not just some special group who went to the right school. It is something that's in all of us, and it's something that's very broadly available in our culture.
Anything that you need to make, it's important that you make it. Humans do two things that make us unique from all other animals. We use tools and we tell stories. And when you make something, you're doing both at once.
Today's DIY is tomorrow's Made in America. Your projects are examples of a revolution that's taking place in American manufacturing. A revolution that can help us create new jobs and industries for decades to come.
Makers are a source of innovation. I think it relates back to something like the birth of the personal computer industry. This is Steve Wozniak. Where does he learn about computers? It's the Homebrew Computer Club, just like a hackerspace. And he says, you know, I could go there all day long and talk to people and share ideas for free.
You're telling a story about your desire, you're telling a story about something that you want, you're telling a story about something that you see needs to be made, and you are using your tools to improve yourself and improve the world around you.
If you can imagine it, then you can do it, whatever it is. This is a country that imagined a railroad connecting a continent, imagined electricity powering our cities and towns, imagined skyscrapers reaching into the heavens, and an internet that brings us closer together. So we imagined these things, then we did them. And that's in our DNA, that's who we are.
So, you know, last year we did, actually this is a different type, but we did 151 maker fairs. We also did a weekend at Barnes & Noble bookstores of maker fairs, over 600 stores in America. But a lot of these fairs are organized by volunteers in cities, and we support them, and they kind of copy the model that we learned from doing it in the Bay Area. We also ourselves produce a large one in New York. But in 2014, we had a maker fair at the White House, and we continue to have a national maker fair in DC in the summer. But you know, Russell the giraffe, as I said, is at these fairs. This, Simon mentioned the Shenzhen Maker Fair, is really one of the largest fairs. It was free. It was open as about 4 city blocks. It's really pretty fascinating. It was terribly hot, I have to tell you. It's similar. I went from Washington, D.C. to Shenzhen and then to Singapore, and all three were just really, really hot. Amazing the energy there. And I have to say the Chinese government, number 2 person there visited a maker space in Shenzhen last year in the spring, and they really began to see the power of this to drive innovation, drive small business, and particularly kind of you know, obviously we have such manufacturing capacity there. How do you marry that to developing, you know, their ideas and their innovative approaches to things? So they're putting maker spaces in every school in Shenzhen. They're really, you know, getting behind this. Really different than America. I have to say it's kind of interesting because America, has no government connection other than the president, like, sort of blessing it. Which is wonderful. They've done a great job, but there's very little money, very little sort of drive that way. It's more, especially even in schools, it's bottom up, and it's more community driven. And the challenge in China, in many ways, is how do you grow the community? Sometimes because, you know, the government's saying do this, and the community kind of, you know, doesn't know what to do. And yet, there's some really great entrepreneurs coming out of Shenzhen that, you know, instead of going to work for a company, they're starting to build a company. And they're doing maker products like Jason Wong of MakeBlock. And makers from America are going to incubators and spending time in Shenzhen because they can make things there. And they were really frustrated in America to be able to make things. And if any of you are involved in manufacturing, let me know, because I'd love to talk to you. Because Americans are really, you know what Kickstarter is, right? So people, Zach will talk later, you were on Kickstarter, right? So Americans are they created Kickstarter. They're funding lots of projects on Kickstarter. But then it's taking them 18 months to 2 years to make the thing that they got funded. And my realization when I was in Shenzhen is that there's people over in Shenzhen watching what's proposed on Kickstarter and making it before the person that proposed it on Kickstarter is able to make it, right? So it's really kind of fascinating that in America we don't have the small batch manufacturing capacity, and we don't often have the ability to make a couple thousand of something and see if it works. And that's kind of what we need, I think, to take advantage of the maker movement. As I said, May 20th and 22nd, tickets are on sale. We'd love to see you there. It's pretty amazing, I think, if you haven't had that experience. So, one of the things that I believe, particularly for all of us, is are we empowered to create the future? Is it something that we expect to do? This is Unisphere. It's from the World's Fair, and that's where we hold New York, the Maker Faire in New York. It's on the grounds of the New York Hall of Science, which was part of the World's Fair. And the future in the 1964 World's Fair was created by companies like RCA. Oh, are they around anymore? Westinghouse. GE's still around, but not quite doing what they promised. Disney was there, and they're still around. But we kind of thought that they would be creating the robots of the future, and they would be doing the cool things. And I think in many ways, Maker Faire is like a World's Fair, but it's not these large companies necessarily certainly exclusively doing this creation. Well, at this World's Fair in '64, Isaac Asimov, have you heard of him? Science fiction writer, wrote I, Robot and a bunch of other titles. He visited the World's Fair in 1964, and as an exercise in his mind, he says, what will the world look like 50 years if you came back in 2014 and visited the World's Fair? Then what would you look like? I won't go through all of them, but I love it. He said, electroluminescent panels, I showed you one already, will be in common use. Robots will be neither common nor very good, but they will be in existence. Computers much miniaturized that will serve as the brains of robots. So we kind of got the microcontrollers and the other pieces out here. Only unmanned ships will have landed on Mars, though a manned expedition will be in the works. He's pretty prescient about a lot of things here. He said the world will have few routine jobs that cannot be done better by some machine than by any human, by any human being. Mankind will therefore become largely a race of machine tenders. And he said all the high school students will be taught the fundamentals of computer technology, will be trained to perfection in the use of computer language. It's sad that that's the one he got wrong, right? I mean, it was a pretty good prediction at the time, and we just didn't go in that direction. So he ends his thoughts with saying, mankind will suffer badly from the disease of boredom, a disease spreading more widely each year and growing in intensity. This will have serious mental, emotional, and sociological consequences. And the lucky few will be those who are involved in creative work of any sort, and they will be the true elite for mankind, for they will do more than serve a machine. And so I think he was looking at the makers. But I don't like the idea of the makers being an elite few. I don't even like makers being just engineers. I really want everybody to be a maker and to be involved in creating that future, because otherwise we'll fear the future. We won't have hope for it. We'll be afraid that someone else is going to make it different and impose it on us, and impose technology on us. So anyway, I would encourage you to make together with families, kids in your community, join a makerspace, get out there, come to maker fairs. And, let me ask you, how many of you are makers? Raise your hand. Come on, not everybody's raising their hand. Come on, get up there. You guys are engineering society and you're not makers? All right, just say yes, okay? That's the answer. It was a test. And you could have gotten it right if you had said yes. But we need you to be part of the maker community, to learn make, and share as part of that community. And join us to join a movement. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk.
Thank you.
And represent from the CIE, we want to present a
Thank
small
you.
token.
Thank you
for
very
the-
much.
The effort.
Thank you.
the great work.